Power levels in 7 Deadly Sins make absolutely no sense. That's it. That's the video. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is that guy with the pencil, writing off. Alright, I'm kidding. I have actual issues with power levels. The main issue with power levels is that from the moment they were introduced, they were too complex for their own good. Now, I don't mind complexities, really. I really actually love them. Detailed power systems like Nen and other types of power systems are great for me. However, regardless of that, I think to maintain a complex system that works with the narrative rather than against it, the author needs to lay ground rules, stick to those ground rules, and have a consistent through line to make things work properly. However, while Nakaba lays out ground rules, like his narrative consistency, he fumbles a lot. Nakaba's power level system would be fine if it was just big numbers and those big numbers were consistent. However, neither of these things are the case. Nakaba decided to split power levels into 3 things: strength, magic, and spirit. And he also calls them combat classes, but no one calls them combat classes. Then, after splitting power levels into these 3 categories, he proceeds to adhere to none of these categories within the story itself. So, let's start off with strength. Strength, you'd think that one would make sense, how hard you can hit a thing. You wouldn't think that would be that hard to measure, right? Well, don't worry, apparently it is. So, the narrative tells us that through their fights, Diane and Meliotis are relative in strength, but according to power levels, Diane should one-shot Meliotis casually considering she's nearly twice his strength at 1870 to Meliotis' 960. But that doesn't happen. They're relative, if not Meliotis having the edge. This pattern of inconsistency continues. Despite Meliotis being only around 14% stronger than Galland at 27,720, he absolutely bodies him without the uses of Lost Vein, despite Galland at 24,000 strength should be way more relative to Meliotis, considering that Meliotis was relative to Diane at all when she nearly doubled him in strength. Then Derriere comes in swinging against Meliotis using Lost Vein, a sacred treasure which we knows amps the sins to a good degree, despite being 2,000 in strength weaker than Meliotis at 50,000 while she's at 48,000, forces Meliotis to block, and after some amps of her own literally knocks him out of Demon Mark. Even earlier in the fight, Zelda versus Meliotis, despite Zelda being even weaker than Derriere strength-wise in terms of numbers with no way to amp himself physically, and really closer to Galland in terms of the gap in raw physical might between him and Meliotis, he not only blitzes through a Demon Mark Meliotis, but cleanly cleaves his arm off before Meliotis can even complete his swing, while Meliotis is still at 50,000, as Eldris is at 47,200. Doesn't stop there though. Meliotis in Demon Mark lands a punch on Gloxinia, yet Gloxinia doesn't instantaneously die despite him being at literally 0 strength in comparison to Meliotis' 50,000, and a character like Galland who's only 3,700 weaker than Meliotis getting dented and dominated, while only being around 3,700 strength weaker than Meliotis. But it still doesn't stop there. Mon Speed, he's a strong dude, right? Well, according to numbers, he's not. My man is only 16,000 strong, which explains why he got body bagged by a disabled Meliotis, but doesn't explain how he in any universe managed to restrain Estarossa, who at 53,000 strength is 3 times stronger than him physically. Gowther versus Dreyfus. Despite Dreyfus being literally twice Gowther's physical strength at 1,000 to Gowther's 500, he takes serious damage from Gowther's punch. What does this all mean? It means that the strength part of power levels is mainly just nonsense. It doesn't match up with the series multiple times throughout, and overall doesn't really make sense to the point that Nakaba realized it and flat out stopped telling us them. Yeah, it matches up sometimes, but a lot of the times it really doesn't make sense, and even the relative gaps aren't consistent throughout the story. But let's move on to magic. Now, honestly, magic is almost just as egregious as strength, but why? Well, let's play hopscotch through the series again. Meliotis is notoriously magically weak, power level wise. In terms of the narrative, he's just as strong magically as he is physically, but the numbers would tell you otherwise. Meliotis in Demon Mark in his fight with Droll and Gloxinia only has a magic level of 3,000 compared to Droll's 14,000, and Gloxinia's staggering 47,000. So by all logic, none of Meliotis' magical attacks should be working, and his defenses against magic should not be that strong. However, it's not the case. Meliotis tanks many magic field attacks, and his own are treated seriously, despite his supposedly magically weak nature in power levels. They even blow through Gloxinia's magic, who is over 15 times stronger than him magically. Even Droll outdoes him 4 times over, but it doesn't matter to Meliotis despite his number. Galland, a person with 0 magic at the time, takes magical attacks from a limited Berserk Meliotis, who has a magic of 400 at least going off his base, but Galland takes no damage despite his actual 0 magic. A damaged base post-druid Meliotis with a magic level of 2,700 managed to resist Melaskila's 31,500 magic soul rip at all. Merlin and King both have many problems, as Merlin never got an updated magic level, which leads me to believe she's pulling up on commandment tier fighters like Grey Road, who have 26,500 magic with 3,550 magic of her own. King, with his 3,370, struggles to even harm Meliotis before his post-root power-up, and that Meliotis only has 400 magic. Magic is weird, because it's a number that also seemingly means nothing, just like its strength counterpart, to such a degree that, just like with strength, Nakaba's just stopped telling us them, and all that's left is spirit. Spirit seems like a category that Nakaba made as just a joke. It's only ever mentioned once with Gother's blackout ability, and overall it's just a pointless addition to make power levels more complicated than they needed to be. With our only mental manipulators being Gother, Merlin, and technically Zeldris, there's not much to contradict, except it still gets contradicted. Look at the fact that characters like Gother with 1,300 magic managed to use his abilities on Meliotis, despite his 2010 spirit directly overwhelming Gother's types of magic. Or the idea that Nighttime Escanor with 5 spirit managed to resist Gother's mind hacks at all when Gother is still at 1,300 magic. So really, even spirit isn't the most consistent, and it, like its brethren, fails to make an appearance after a while because Nakaba just gave up on making up numbers for them. However, hold on, maybe it gets better when we look at power levels as just big numbers. Nah, you know it's just as bad. Now, power levels as whole numbers seem to lack as a whole, ironically enough. Galland, when he shows up initially, should have sneezed and murdered everyone with his 26,000, even with no magic, while the highest closest comparison was less than half of that at Berserk Meliotis' 10,300, but he doesn't do that. Base Meliotis versus Droll still makes no sense, while Meliotis' 32,000 versus 54,000. Even if Droll was damaged, he should have slapped the soul out of Meliotis. Then, Demon Mark Meliotis versus Droll and Gloxinia makes no sense, with his 56,000 against their 54,000 for Droll and 50,000 for Gloxinia. Same case for Demon Mark Meliotis versus the majority of the commandments. He should have one-shot most of them with his 56,000, considering his closest competitor would be Monspeet at 53,000. The only commandments that do make sense against Meliotis as just big numbers are Esteros and Zeldris, who have bigger numbers at 60,000 for Zeldris and 61,000 for Esterosa. Esterosa versus Monspeet still makes no sense, even given the pure big number concept, since Esterosa outclasses both Monspeet and Derriere with their 53,000 and 52,000 respectively, with his 60,000. A 3-commandment Mael, who has a power level beyond 88,000, was not able to one-shot characters like Post-Training King at 41,600 and Post-Memories Gother at 35,400. 4-command Mael at over 200,000 isn't one-shot slaughtering characters like Diane at 8,800, Post-Training King at 41,600, and Gother at 35,400. Characters like Margaret Body Ludishell at 201,000 aren't blitz one-shotting characters like Zeldris at 61,000. And this is just me going off actual fights that happen in the narrative, which don't really align with power levels. Power levels cause even more havoc when you actually go to scale the characters. Zelda states that Meliotis is stronger than him, and could actually defeat the one if he tried, sentiment that Escanor reaffirms later. But according to Assault Mode Meliotis' power level, he'd be fodderized by Margaret Body Ludishell, since Margaret Body Ludishell has 201,000 as his power level. However, we know this isn't the case. According to scaling, we know characters like Meliotis should slap up Albions casually at the beginning of the series, but according to his 3,370 power level and in Albion's 5,500, it's a different story. According to scaling, Post-Training King is relative to, if not stronger than Commandments thanks to fighting Mael at all, but according to numbers, he's weaker than even Droll at his 41,000 compared to Droll's 54,000. There are plenty more examples, but I feel as I go on, I'll be redundant. And as you can tell, once again, Nakaba just gave up on power levels towards the end of the series because he stopped releasing them after Ludishell and Mael. Just pure big numbers, he stopped and just gave up. So things don't look good for power levels as a whole. My point from all of this really is that power levels are pretty contradictory to the narrative, and thus using them for things like scaling and ranking in the verse or locking them down to certain levels outside the verse is not really fair or that valid in my mind. The numbers contradict the narrative too often to be trusted. If it happened once, I could let it slide. If it happened twice, I could let it slide. If it happened 3 times, I could let it slide. But there are too many instances in the series that I've mentioned so far, and more that I haven't even talked about, that just simply don't make sense. Characters just surviving hits that they shouldn't, or characters going through things that they shouldn't be able to get through. The series just fails to keep its own consistency. And if the series can't keep its own consistency with the power levels, I'm not going to trust them because they're so spotty. I think Nakaba introduced them as a cool concept, but failed to remotely rationalize them within the narrative he was writing. When even your plain big numbers contradict the story you are directly showing us, something is wrong. And I think Nakaba knew that he was going to mess up, because the moment he introduced power levels, he quickly had Merlin say that they were not always true, that they vary, that they can be inconsistent, that it all depends on circumstances. He even contradicts himself in pretty much the same chapter. He has Merlin say later on in the narrative that big numbers don't really matter, except for when they do, when the big number immediately mattered the page after that. When you have to build an escape route for yourself so quickly as you introduce a concept into the narrative, you need to think about whether you should have introduced the concept into the narrative at all, and that is the case with power levels explicitly. I think power levels ended up being too complicated for their own good and ended up doing more harm than good because of how rarely they line up with what's actually going on panel. And that's a big issue for major concepts such as power levels. They are supposed to tell us who's stronger than who, but they fail to do that really on any level multiple times, whether it be as individual categories or just as big old numbers. In the end, they just can't serve their function and basically end up as useless numbers that actively and consistently contradict the very story they are presented in. And that's the main issue. I think power levels are cool. They're big numbers. I don't know. Something satisfying about seeing them. I know that's why a lot of videos that do hypothetical power levels for characters get a lot of love and support. We just like seeing big numbers, whether it makes sense to us or not. And a lot of the times, especially in 7 Deadly Sins, they just don't really make sense. That's why you see me rarely mention them. That's the only reason. I think they're cool. I just don't think they really make sense. That's the main issue I have with them. So when I see people come up with hypothetical power levels, I'm like, okay, that's cool. Not really going to use it though. And then when I see people use real power levels for things like, oh, this character should be stronger than that because of the number, or things like, oh, this character should be limited to this amount because their power level isn't that big in comparison to another series or something like that, that's when I'm like, I don't really think so. It's stuff like that. It personally doesn't sit right with me, mainly because of how many times it's wrong. Like, this isn't me saying, oh, I disagree with this. It's literally the narrative saying, oh yeah, you see this number right here? It doesn't match this number right here, so it's wrong. Does multiple times. If it had done it once, twice, thrice, maybe I could give it a pass. But too many times. So I can't really give it a pass. However, I understand people will. I'm not the one who tell you how to scale. I'm just explaining to you why I think they make no sense. Why the narrative says they make no sense. All that stuff like that. However, keep using them. Keep hypothesizing. That stuff is fun to do, I'll admit. I love hypothesizing how strong the Demon King is, because there are a lot of different ways you can get into weird numbers. However, do I really use them? Not really, not on my own. If Nakaba ever comes out with a Ultimate Parasang guidebook and it has all the power levels for all the characters in the series that actually fought, we got Demon King power level, Supreme Deity power level, Chaos power level, all this wonderful stuff, great. I'll see if they contradict the narrative still, because hopefully they don't, but I don't know, that's the thing. My faith in power levels has been it's been shaken too much by the series so far, so if we ever do get more, I'll just check them. I'll check them, and if they line up, great. If they don't, I'm not surprised. But tell me what you guys think about power levels in the comment section down below. Do you agree with me? Do you think they're a little bit weird? Do you think they're a little bit shoddy and spotty, like that they don't work entirely? Or do you love them and you think they're perfectly fine and I'm wrong? I don't really mind either way. This is really just a discussion for me to open up the forum to the fact that power levels, they may not be the best thing to talk about in general when it comes to using them as accurate things. But that's neither here nor there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That Guy with a Pencil, writing off.